Hello, it is Wednesday the 29th of July, which means it's coming up to the end of Camp NaNoWriMo, and I technically just passed my 50,000 words, but I don't know if it counts or not. So if you're new here, my name's Jackie. I'm revising my 2019 NaNoWriMo project for this camp. I have also taken to sitting on the couch in front of the big window we have here because it means I can be really lazy with lighting and makeup, so I hope you enjoy my kitchen and stuff in the background. Now, when it comes to my book, I was at 41,000 words and some change yesterday, and yesterday I got through, it said 8,000 words when I highlighted the scenes I'd worked on, but based on the difference in total word count, it was like 5,000 or 6,000, so I'm not sure how that worked. But anyway, yesterday I got through a fairly large chunk of content, and I didn't know whether it counted or not because I read through it and didn't really change anything at all, which has been quite unusual. I mean, I've gone through the book and I've had good sections, but most of them have had a bit of rewriting. Some of them need to be completely overhauled or added. Those ones I generally save for the weekend and I leave highlighted in yellow and do not count towards my total word count. But during the week, I try to go through the sections that don't need as much work. But even though they don't need as much work, they still need some work. So yesterday I couldn't tell if I was being lazy or what was happening for me to have gotten through so much without doing much work. Now today the same thing has happened. So I copied 10,000 words across from my original draft to the current working document. The reason I copied that much was because I'm at a part of the book where the scenes are getting fairly lengthy, so even though my chapters tend to be probably as short as 1,500 words and as long as 3,000 words, often those small chapters could actually be smaller parts that make up one scene or a sequence of scenes. And the section we're in now is when they sort of have a heist. So what I went through today was the planning chapter, the pre-heist vodka celebration chapter, because Russian mafia vodka needs to appear somewhere, the staking out of the house, the getting into the house, the also being in the house and then realizing it's a trap. So all of that added up to 10,000 words, and I copied it across to the document thinking, I'll just see how I go. And the same thing happened as yesterday, where I went through it and didn't feel like anything really needed to change. And objectively, I'm sure it could be better, but the thing is, when I was reading it, it was like when you're getting to the climax of a book and you start reading faster because you want to find out what happens. And even though I know what happens, like I wrote this, I found myself reading faster and probably reading less critically because I was trying to get through it. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, it's a good thing that I wanted to keep reading and getting through it, and I wanted to see what happened next, and I would have felt incomplete. I would have felt a lack of closure if I had have stopped reading and put the book aside. But on the negative side of things, that means that I probably wasn't reading it as closely and it could potentially be better. So I'm in this position where I've hit my 50,000 words. According to the calculator, I'm at 51,155 words, but I don't know whether I should add those to the Nano website, given that I'm probably going to need to go back and redo this section anyway. So I'm not sure what to do with this, because technically, I guess I've gotten through this part of the book, but I really just felt like I was reading through it far more than actively revising it. And I don't feel like I'm in the position where I can say it's because the book doesn't need work, because I'm not a very experienced writer. I'm fairly certain it does need work, but I can't see what work it needs right now. So I'm gonna make a note of that number somewhere, but I'm going to hold off on updating the NaNoWriMo website today and see how I feel about it tomorrow, or maybe see how I feel once I start looking at the draft tomorrow. So, early celebration, I guess? So after last night's 50,000 word triumph, I'm starting to think that my book's a hot mess. Or maybe not even starting. I think I have these circles where I have moments where I'm like, actually, this works quite well. And then I get a piece of information or an idea, or I look at things from a different angle and go, oh my God, what was I thinking? This is never going to work. And what happened this morning was I watched Abby Emmons' latest video, which was on creating a good Dark Night of the Soul. And my current Dark Night of the Soul was when Hannah gets trapped by her father. She and the Brotherhood go on the heist where they're trying to get plans for these weapons he's created. And when they're there, they discover it's a trap. He was expecting them, and he lets the Brotherhood go in exchange for keeping Hannah. And one of the things Abby Emmons was saying was that you can't just have you can just have a bad thing happen to your character, but ideally it shouldn't be just a random bad thing that would be bad for anyone. It should be something that's specifically bad for this character, because that's whose journey we're following. So being trapped isn't like a bad thing specifically for Hannah. So I thought, well, what is bad for Hannah? Well, her emotional vulnerability is her sister Maria. So I'm like, well, how do we incorporate Maria into this? And the more I started thinking about it, the more things started unraveling. So first I thought maybe she could have been brainwashed in the time that Hannah was away, and she's lying in wait in the house for them and going to attack them, which would be interesting, but if that happens, then I'm not entirely sure if we still need the final climactic scene, or if this would become the climactic scene. And then if that's happening, do we even need the super weapons angle, because the final climactic scene was at the auction house where they were planning to sell the weapons. So that was thing one. Then I thought, well, maybe things can still happen the way they do, but they're trapped together and Maria blames Hannah, which could work, but like that needs a lot more thought. Then I thought, well, what if they're trapped together and Maria is mad at Hannah because it was Hannah's science that led to Artem creating these bombs? And that could work with what already happens in the plot, which is, for me, the ideal way of doing things, because I don't want to rewrite everything, especially when I've been through it and at the time I thought things worked. So yeah, I'm just thinking about how to unpick this scene at the moment, and whether unpicking this scene means unraveling the rest of the book. Because when I first started planning it last year, before I did the first draft, it was supposed to be about Hannah and her father. It was supposed to be about her proving herself to her father. And in this revision, I've made it far more about Hannah and her sister. And getting powers, which was the goal for the first part of the book, that wasn't to prove herself to her father anymore. That was to get back in his good graces so she can help Maria escape from this life, because she basically squandered all of the resources that Maria had gathered. So the focus has already changed, and that then calls into question whether like the midpoint shift should be about Artem at all, because for the first half of the book, Hannah's goal is to get home, and then the midpoint shift happens and she discovers, one, he's created these weapons, and two, she discovers a whole lot of shady stuff he's done, and she realizes that he'll stop at nothing and he should be stopped. And I don't know how relevant that second half of the book is anymore with the new focus. So basically, it's a mess. My problem is, because I'm in the book, I don't have context for how much of a mess it is. So I'm wondering, like, do I try and pull it all apart now and turn it into basically a different book, or should I be looking for feedback? Now, at the end of August, I've already booked in with an editor to have a manuscript critique of my first 50 pages. And I chose that rather than the full book because I figured the first part of the book was the weakest part of the book. I thought if I got feedback on that part of the book, a lot of it would probably be applicable to later parts of the book as well, so I could revise the whole book with that in mind before sending everything off to get feedback. So when I send the full book to an editor, it's the best full book it can be. And then I'll also budget, because 50 pages is much cheaper to get reviewed than a full manuscript. So I am already getting it reviewed at this stage. I'm not sure if I should be getting people to look at the full book yet though, like whether I should get some beta readers or maybe even another editor to review the entire book. And then they can tell me if these problems I'm seeing are that big of a deal, because the truth is I've read books, especially in the YA space, that don't follow these rules. that much. Yes, there are masterpieces out there where there's this really strong internal journey and external journey, and there's an emotional thread that runs through the whole thing, and the Dark Night of the Soul is really specific to that character, and the climax is when they have this personal revelation as well as defeating the external forces. And there are books where everything happens and everything is masterful, but then there are also great books that I've loved where it is just about whatever's happening externally. And I'm not sure if my book works in that respect, like whether it's still a decent book despite not being a masterpiece, or whether it's just laughable and I should try to move it towards masterpiece-ness. So let me know what you think. Like, one, when do you think is a good time to get feedback on your book from beta readers, from an editor, from anyone? And two, when you have these like academic rules in your head from all of the craft books you've read, so everything relating to story structure and theme and character development, when's the point where you go, okay, I've still got to address all of this, versus, okay, that was a helpful guideline for me to get this written, now I'm throwing it out and I'm just working on my book? So please let me know, because I have no idea what I'm doing. Hello, it's Friday morning and it's another amazing day. I can't get over the summer we're having. Yesterday I did not go through any more of my book. I actually copied the next couple of scenes into my new working document, and as soon as I started to look at them I went, well, I can't really do anything with these until I figure out how I'm going to unravel what I've done. So I did end up adding my total of 51,155 words to the Nano website, so technically I've won, but this revision was not going to be complete this month anyway. So my plan from here is to spend a little bit of time thinking. Like this weekend I really want to do some high level mapping out of the plot and what it could be if we completely rejig the Dark Night of the Soul moment, but also if we make, if we somehow find a way to put Maria into more of an antagonist role. So rather than it being Hannah against her father, Artem, wanting to save Maria, her sister, maybe we can turn Maria into a tool that Artem is using once they come into conflict again. So I need to figure out how that would work, and if I find a way to make that work, then I need to figure out what of the current book is salvageable. So that should be fun. It is Saturday and I'm still thinking about what to do with my book. And I don't know how much of this is just in my head, and maybe what I've got is already decent and I don't need to be thinking so deeply about it, versus how much of this is legitimately causing it to be a bad book. So I've just done a quick overview of the plot, and I was originally thinking on one side of the page I would do just a list of what currently happens, and then on the other side I'd think about what needs to change. And I think one of the issues I have is that when I write down what I have, it doesn't seem that bad. Like I write it down and go, yeah, this works, this seems logical, except for, the 3 scenes I have earlier in the book that I need to get back to. So maybe I should go back to the list of scenes, like now that they're already written down, maybe I should go back to them in a couple of hours. But at the moment I'm thinking the simplest and most logical solution is to keep the overall plot as it is. They break into Artem's home, they steal the documentation, they realize it's a trap, and then either he takes Hannah back from the Brotherhood and locks her up with Maria, or he takes her back and just sets Maria on her before he decides to lock her up. And I think this would be interesting to create a Dark Night of the Soul type of moment, because then Maria can blame Hannah for these bombs that her father's created, and this would make sense because it comes from the experiment Hannah did at the beginning of the book. So there is a logical connection there. If you hadn't been doing this research, he never would have been able to develop this weapon. And I feel like Maria would also find the bombs to be like really personally not offensive isn't a strong enough word, like horrific. She would feel personally responsible for them because her DNA has been used for these and her powers can be implemented on a mass scale, and she has never liked being a super. She's always been really almost a little bit traumatized by her own powers. She hates the violence. She just doesn't want anything to do with this life. So seeing this part of herself that she resents being automated and able to be distributed to the masses, I feel like that would not sit so well with her. So it would make sense to have an argument there. And if I do it that way, it can make the Dark Night of the Soul moment darker, because it's not that Hannah's locked up, it's that the one person who was her person has abandoned her. And I can make that work with what happens after as well. I just don't know if it's enough. See, I'm second guessing myself so much now. And it's strange to be in this position where technically, like, I won Camp NaNoWriMo. I got my 50,000 words, but I don't feel like there's anything to celebrate because there's still so much more that needs to be done. In fact, I feel like, with the exception of those difficult scenes that I kept getting stuck on, I feel like the first part of the book was a lot more productive, I guess. So I feel like I made more meaningful changes in that part of the book, especially adding in the flashbacks, and that really changed the tone and sort of the emotional focus of the book. And in the second half, or at least in the last, 18,000 words, I think, I haven't really done that much. So it feels like I'm not really achieving anything. I'm just reading through a draft and moving around apostrophes and commas and really small things. So I'm still, I know I probably sound like a broken record now, but I'm still in this space where it's like, am I doing that because it doesn't need the work, or am I just too close or too dense to see the work that it needs? So even though I have this idea now for how to make this moment more powerful, I'm still looking at the last, let's say 18,000 words I went through going, well, what needs to be added to those to improve them? So yeah, it's a strange position to be in. I'm going to continue to see how I go tomorrow. And then on Monday, I'm heading to Switzerland for work. So I don't know how much time I'm going to have to continue working on this. So it could be that I end up taking the next 5 or 6 days off. And that might be a good thing, because then I can come back to it in a week's time with a bit of space. In fact, maybe, I was going to say maybe I should try and get through the rest of the draft today and tomorrow, but that's about 18,000 words. So we'll see. Anyway, I'm going to start looking at the draft again now. I will try to fiddle with this Dark Night of the Soul moment, see how far I get tomorrow, and then, yeah, we'll just see what happens. I added in the new fight scene and I got to the end of the climatic final battle, and the entire time I was reading it, I kept thinking, like, I really like this battle. I really like this book. It's so much fun. And I suppose that's a good thing because I'm enjoying it, but I can't help but thinking, there's a little part of me going, am I completely deluded? Like, no one should feel this way about what is essentially a first draft, because like the stuff I was looking at earlier in the week, the battle, I didn't really change anything, like a couple of words here and there, but all in all, I left it the same. And the thing is about first drafts is they're supposed to be bad, so I can't figure out if, like, I wrote something that was good or if I'm just deluding myself. So this has actually helped me learn a couple of lessons, which I'm hoping will help me with my next project I'm revising. The first lesson is that I think it would actually be helpful for me to have external feedback earlier in the process. So the reason I didn't send the first draft of Powerless out to an editor or beta readers or anything was because it was a first draft. I knew it needed a lot of work, and I felt that getting feedback on it at that stage would be wasted, because if I came back to it in a few months with fresh eyes, then I would be able to do a lot of that myself. So there's no point in getting feedback to tell me what I can already see myself, if that makes any sense. What ended up happening though was that I had a 6-month break. I finished the first draft at the end of December last year, and I picked it up for revisions at the beginning of July, not including the prep work from the middle of October. And the distance doesn't seem to have made that much of a difference, or at least it stopped making a difference. So one part of the learning is maybe just get that feedback early, and then when I go back to look at it, I have more concrete guidance for what I should be looking at, as opposed to just trusting that I'll magically figure out what's wrong and be able to fix it just through having enough distance. The second lesson is just based on the way my brain works, I don't think it's realistic for me to expect to get through a revision in like a single sprint, if you like. So in this case, in the single month of Camp NaNoWriMo. And the reason I think this is because for the first half of the book, even though the broad structure remained the same, I was making changes. There are about 6,000 words in that half which need to be completely cut and rewritten. I just didn't have the mental capacity to do them at the time. But I was also adding in flashbacks and a couple of new scenes, and there was some significant work that was happening in the first couple of weeks of this process. For the last couple of weeks though, I feel like I haven't really been making any changes like that. It's just been tidying up words here and there. And a first revision should be more aggressive than that. And part of it could be that maybe the second half of the book's just stronger. But I think part of it is also that I was just getting a bit mentally worn out by that stage. And that was probably compounded by the fact that I started a new job. So at the same time as trying to revise my book, I was starting a new job, getting to know who everyone was, figuring out what my role was, getting very stressed in the process. So it wasn't the best timing. But aside from the new job, I feel like, especially over the last week where I've gone through very large sections in single settings and haven't really found much to change, I feel that was due to just being a bit mentally drained, and maybe it would be better for me if I did like revisions in 2-week chunks. So I did 2 weeks to look at a certain part of the book, and then I put it aside and then came back a couple of weeks later. And then every time I'm coming back to it somewhat fresh, or more fresh than I would be if I just pushed through. I have some thinking time when I can think about how to address issues I couldn't address on the spot. And I just feel like it might be more productive if I do it that way rather than trying to push through the whole thing. So when I next have a project to revise, we'll try that method and see how it goes. So the final lesson relating to that is that I don't feel like NaNoWriMo or Camp NaNoWriMo is conducive to me for revisions. I think for a first draft it worked really well last year in that I had to continue pushing ahead every day. Even though my internal critic is very strong, I had to switch her off for a little bit just so I could keep writing and get it done. And I think there's value in just pushing on until you have a first draft done, because as the saying goes, until you have something on the page, you can't improve it. So even if it's a crappy first draft, it's still improvable. Revisions don't really work the same way though, because in a revision, you're not just pushing to get through, you're trying to make it better, and that might take a bit more time. So those are my lessons learnt from the July Camp NaNoWriMo. When it comes to the status of my project, my document has 73,444 words, and that is the entire manuscript excluding the last scene, which I thought I'd leave off because I need to rewrite it anyway, and I'd rather come back to it after having been through the whole book again. Of those 73,500 words, there's about 6.5 that needs to be taken off that word count, because these are the scenes I got to in the book and I could see that they needed work, but I couldn't figure out what to do with them at the time due to being mentally drained and having a new job and pushing myself through and everything I mentioned earlier. So the total words I actually revised, if we take off the 6,500, is around 59,000 words. So, no, 69,000 words. 67? I will put the number on the screen. I'm a writer, not a mathematician. Though you don't need to be a mathematician to do simple subtraction, but we'll just put that to the side for the moment. So, from here, as I've mentioned probably several times now, tomorrow I'm on a flight to Switzerland for work. I have no idea what the next week is going to look like. I do know on Wednesday I'm running a full day branding workshop, which should be interesting. So even if I have time to work on the book, I'm not expecting I'll have that much mental energy. So I'm going to treat this next week as like a week off, or just a meditating, ruminating type of week to think about the issues I know I still need to address. After that, when I get back to Estonia, I want to go back through the book. I want to address the major scenes that need to be rewritten. So there's 3 of them. There are a couple of other issues I've noticed throughout. One is that I need to introduce the Brotherhood earlier in the book, and I did try to do that in a new scene. I don't know how well I've done it though, so I want to look at how to build up the Brotherhood before we meet the Brotherhood. If you're new here, Brotherhood is the Russian mafia. I want to look at building the sense of place a lot more, because that's something I was a bit lazy with in the first draft, just because I based it in a fictional version of Tallinn, Estonia, and didn't bother describing everything because I could see everything in my head. So now I need to describe it so that people who aren't here can see it as well. And then of course there are really little things I need to address, like certain side characters I haven't named yet, or places I haven't named. I haven't actually named the city that they're in, so I need to fill in all of those gaps. After that, on the 24th of August, I've booked in a manuscript critique for the first 50 pages. So I think that'll be interesting for, one, getting feedback on whether this is actually decent, it has promise, or whether it's all in my head and I should just burn it. And 2, I think it'll be good for getting feedback that will potentially be relevant for the entire book. So when I go into the next round of revisions, then I have more of a guideline for what to do. At that time, I'd also like to get some feedback from some other people. So one of them is Chris. If you're watching, hi Chris. She's my science advisor person. So I'd like her to look at the draft and see if we can figure out the scientific explanation for this world where there are people with superpowers, because what I originally had wasn't accurate, but it was a little bit easier, like conversationally. It was a gene mutation, and it's very easy to slip the mutation into the conversation. People know what a gene mutation is. When we were talking, she taught me about the process of bacterial transfection, and we could have a special type of plasmid DNA. The thing is, most people don't know the word plasmid, I assume, so if we replace mutation with plasmid, that doesn't work as well. There are also some logistical things, like the antagonist develops a bomb which mimics superhuman powers, and we need to find a way for that to work with the science. So I'd like her to review it. I've highlighted everything where I mention any sort of science in the book so she can see it, and then we can figure out how to make the science work for the plot rather than figuring out the science and then trying to change the plot so it works. I'm also tempted to get some feedback from some beta readers. Even though the thought terrifies me, I am still worried that this isn't ready for beta readers. My ego is very concerned that I'm going to send it to people and they'll go, oh my god, she thinks she can be a writer, like this person's deluding herself. But again, getting external feedback might be helpful. So if you're watching this and you'd be interested in being a beta reader, please let me know in the comments and we'll take it from there. So all in all, that gives me another 3 weeks to fix up everything I haven't already fixed up. But in general, I do know the book needs work, but I still love this book. I still love this story. It's a lot of fun, and I feel like I'm so serious in a lot of my life, or not even serious. I put so much pressure on myself. Like, even if I take something up as a hobby, the standard in my head is, okay, in 6 months I want to be able to do this to a professional standard. And it's nice to have something that's just fun, so I like it from that respect. And having something that's this fun after the last project I tried, Reciprocal Stalking, which was a lot more serious, it has just highlighted how much I need that in my life. So it is making me think more carefully about what I'll work on next. And I do want to work on something in a similar space that is a little bit silly, is a little bit out there and outlandish, and is just a fun ride. And if it ever gets published, it's a fun escape for whoever reads it. So that was my Camp NaNoWriMo. In the comments, 1, let me know if you'd like to beta read. 2, please let me know if you were doing camp, how you did. Did you win? If you didn't win, did you learn? Because as I've discovered, the lessons I've learned are actually far more important than the word count I hit. Finally, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, do everything that keeps YouTube happy, and I will see you next time. Bye.